The Middle Ages was between the 5th century to the 15th century. It was also known as the medieval times or the Dark Ages. It was a period consumed by war, cruelty, plagues, and yes, of course, the reason you're watching this episode today, torture, hence the fact that it had the nickname of the Dark Ages. So the first medieval torture device that I'm going to bring up, it almost didn't even make my list because there's been debate on whether or not it actually existed during the time, and it goes by the name of the Iron Maiden. So
okay.
it was basically just a giant iron sarcophagus that had a bunch of metal spikes inside of it. Right. And the design for it was to puncture and hit vital organs in the body just enough for it to bleed out slowly, not to instantaneously kill anybody. So the reason why there was debates on whether or not this actually existed during that time period was because there was no record of it ever being used. The first ever mention of it didn't happen until the 1800s, which is well after the 15th century. And then people started making replicas of it. So they couldn't even find an original one. The theory as to why they made this, if it didn't exist, and come up with this grand idea of, oh, let's make this sarcophagus that fucking slowly kills people, was to try and scare society to let them know, hey, this is how things used to be, but society has since advanced, and now we don't torture people like that anymore, and we'll rather hang somebody or use a guillotine, things of that nature.
Yeah, well, I'm sure by the time the 18th century came along, it was more laws and stuff in place. As far as the 15th, it was probably we do what the fuck we want.
Yeah. The next type of torture devices was a form of, it's called pillory. Right, so it was kind of like where your hands and heads or even feet would be put in what's called the stocks. Those wooden things where it'd be around your neck and you'd have your hands in it. Kinda? No, but it's not a guillotine though. It's just they called them the stocks, right? And you would just sit there so people could throw shit at you, things like that. Now people were less likely to die from this. This was more of a punishment used for public humiliation than anything. But there were some extreme cases where, let's say, if someone was a repeat offender, they would have things done to them, like they would cut their nose off while they're in it.
Damn.
They would brand them. They'd brand a part of their body. They would put a hole in their fucking tongue. Or real repeat offenders, they would actually nail their ears to the board. So that way when their time was up and they would remove it so that way they could move, they had to rip themselves out of it.
God damn.
So that was one form of pillory. The other one was called the whipping post. And I mean, it's self-explanatory by the name. It was a post that you would get tied to or nailed to, and then you would get flogging done to you. You get flogged, if you will. Which flogging is just a bunch of different types of like whips and things to be
not
with.
To be mistaken with vlogging.
No.
Flogging.
Yeah, very, very different. In fact, some of the things that they would use to flog you with, like there was one whip that I was looking at where it had multiple ends, and at the very tips of those ends, they would have like little iron hooks. So that way, every time they'd whip you, they would actually like rip flesh from your fucking body every single time. So yeah, some people got whipped real bad.
Got that back whip.
Yeah. Now this one was fucking fun. It was called the Judas cradle. It had two parts to it. So one part was a pulley system that was used to bind you and then suspend you in the air. The second part was a stool, much like the one you're currently sitting on, except it had a like pyramid shape attached to the top of it. And what they would do is they would actually suspend you over that and slowly lower you onto this pyramid. So you can imagine the pain that would probably cause to someone's rectum.
Sitting on that.
Yeah, pretty nasty.
Yeah.
So that's what they would use with that. And then this is the sick part too. They would never wash that pyramid that they drop people on.
So they drop you.
Well, they lower you on it.
Oh,
It's
God.
like a slow, agonizing pain to the fucking anus. It's bad. They wouldn't wash it. So even if, let's say, you survived the whatever torture and punishment you were supposed to receive, there's still a good chance that you will die later on from catching some sort of disease,
bacteria or something.
Yeah, because just imagine the nastiness on that shit.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, we got it easy nowadays.
Yeah, no, everyone, even criminals have rights now. Oh, there's the iron chair, and it just how it sounds. Again, they weren't very creative with some of these names. It was an iron chair that was covered in spikes, and you would get strapped to it, and your body would slowly drive into the stakes just from your own body weight and gravity taking place. They would also put flames underneath, or like hot coal underneath the chair to heat it up, just to make the pain a little more unbearable. This was often used as a tool to extract confessions. And now let's say if, like, you, me, and a couple other people, we were all accused of doing the same shit, right?
Right.
What they would do with this torture device is they would bring all of us into the room and make all of us watch the first person go through the punishment and feel it and stuff like that. And usually that would get people to say, nah, fuck this. Hey, I ain't sitting on that shit.
Cracking.
I'm snitching.
Listen, it was him, man. It was him.
Yeah. There was one that was called the head crusher.
Damn.
So it was sort of like a vice style design. You'd put your chin in a thing. They'd put like a bowl on the top part, and it'd have spikes in it, and they would just slowly crank it down. Just by turning a screw at the end of it. The most common injuries that this would cause, if you could imagine, it would be breaking the jaw, shattering teeth,
brain dead,
popping eyeballs out of the socket was another good one for this. And then, yes, in the most extreme cases, and the one that people almost always died from, they would crush the skull so much that your brain would basically just fucking seep out. It's fun times back then. And I don't get what the big deal was where they loved messing with people's fucking assholes so much, but this next one was called the Spanish donkey. And it was basically a triangular shaped like type of stool. It was like a stool chair kind of thing. It was like a long, like almost a bench seat, but it was a triangle, right? So you would sit on it, your feet would be suspended in the air, right? They wouldn't be able to touch the ground while you're sitting on this damn thing.
All your weight is on your butt.
Yeah. And it would leave people permanently crippled. It would destroy their rectum, right?
You can't shit no more.
Sometimes they would even add spikes to that. So they really loved messing with people's assholes, and they really liked spikes.
Freaky ass Middle Ages.
Oh, they would also do things like tie like weights, things to weigh down your legs.
Damn.
To speed up the process. And then just to fuck with people furthermore, they would try to tickle your feet or burn them to get you to move around, because the more you move around, the more you're fucking yourself up. There's a gland called the perineum, and if you rupture it, you can internally bleed to death. And then there was also I don't know if we call it the tailbone now. It's a small part on the end of the spine that's called the sacrum, some shit like that.
Yeah.
And if you're from sitting on this too long, if that would break, you'll never be able to walk again. There was no fixing it.
Ooh-wee.
So all kinds of nastiness. And then the final one. And no, this one did not involve people's assholes.
Thank God.
But it was called rat torture.
What, they just put you in a little bed or something and put a bunch of rats in there?
There's a bunch of different variations of rat torture. But the one that specifically caught my eye was they would take like a metal cage with no bottom or a bowl,
heat it up,
and they'd put the rats on you, and then they'd heat it up.
Too Fast, Too Furious.
Yeah, there was a scene in that. Yep.
He put the little
and it started
bucket.
scratching away at them because the heat gets so unbearable. They try to find a way out, and so they would actually do that to motherfuckers back then.
Wow,
it's insane, ain't it?
Boy, you better stay on the straight and narrow, man.
And this is only like, there's so many more different tortures and shit that happen that it is unbelievable. the kind of
sick shit that used to go on back in the day.
definitely sick shit. But the type of imagination that people had to have is what
Hey man,
throws me off, dude.
idle minds.
You know?
Imagine if this is your job. Like, just sit there and watch people sit on a fucking stool,
Yep.
burn their feet so they could squirm around and rip apart their buttholes. Like,
Oh yeah.
I wonder what they're paying for that shit.
Paying?
You think they were paying pretty good?
I have no idea, man. That's still disgusting in itself. Some of the stuff that they would do. They would even like cripple people's fingers. Like the bone, the head crusher. They had one for your fingers that was like a vice where you'd put like two fingers in it, like a thumbs or your pointers, and they would just keep cranking it down until basically your fucking muscle just splits out. So honorable measure, I guess is, I don't know if it's called a thumb crusher or finger crusher or whatever the fuck it was, but it was the same kind of design as the bone crusher.
It's called it. This shit gonna hurt.
Yeah,
crusher.
And again, all these had different variations and different things that they would do to them. Like for example, women when they were trying to find witches and they would use the Judas cradle, they'd sit the women on it. Not using the pulley system, they would actually mount them on it, and then they would tie like crates or not crates, but jugs of water to their feet and hands to weigh them down. And they said, well, if you're not a witch, you're holding water, which is like holy, and you'd be able to float off of this. Which obviously we all know that's bullshit. That would have never happened, but that was some of the logic that they would use back then to do some of these torture devices.
What would cause them to think you a goddamn witch?
I think back in those times, just having any kind of intellect as a female, they would assume that you were
hide your wives, because they busting buttholes out there.
Yeah, they
diabolical ass.
They all diddy no cap, like damn.
For real.
So
scary.
Yeah, so that's some of the stuff that they would do. If you want to hear more, or if you have one you want us to talk about on the show, feel free to drop a comment. Right after you hit a like, right after you share it, all those kind of things.
Yes, sir.
You got anything you want to add?
Nah, I'm good, man.
All right, so stick around. We got part 2 coming up.
Yeah.
Subscribe, share, show you care.